And welcome, one and all. I'm Steve Rosenbaum, here with Gene DeRose.
Hey, how you doing?
And we're going to, in this episode of Future Forward, we're going to actually get in a time machine. And we're going to go a little backwards to go forwards, if there's a phrase like that, right?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
So we're going to talk in this episode about social commerce. And to do that, we have an expert with us today, Gene DeRose, who has lived through a couple of iterations of that space. And I just thought it would be good to go back to 2011 when TechCrunch featured you prominently, and talk about the company that you built or began to build, and then how that changed, and then we'll talk about where social commerce is today. How's that?
Sure, that sounds good. And I don't want to dwell so much on my failed startup, but I do feel like I and my partners were onto something really special. So Want, W-A-N-T exclamation point, which I co-founded with Mike Satow and Jack Widman, was, think of it as Instagram meets Pinterest for mobile 3 years too early. It was a mobile app where you would actually go point and shoot at pictures of things you'd want and build a kind of a registry for yourself. Of course, things were impossible to be sourced, and this was before even Foursquare had established that you could check into a place. So the idea of saying this thing I saw in a Walmart is something I want, you couldn't connect any of the dots.
So by the way, you may not remember this, but I was actually at the launch party.
Oh, the launch! I do remember you being at the launch. It was a good launch party.
It was a good launch party, and I got the premise right away. I was like, "This is a cool thing."
People really did get it, and it's a side story about how startups flow and ebb and manage themselves. And I've tended to be too dogged about a particular vision or controlling the companies myself. But regardless, what we did do that relates into this is we realized early on. And wanted to move a little more towards desktop and a little more explicitly to shopping. And so the whole thing was kind of repositioned as a business called Generous, where like the US, originally we wanted to have it be .us because the whole idea would be this is personal shopping, a store just for you. Because if in fact you could have all of your friends participate or give clues to what you would want, you'd collectively have a great vision of things, and they'd be able to reference it and get together if they wanted to buy you something. You could look at some screenshots of that, and it's quite interesting. But what I discovered in the middle of that was that there was a movement afoot that I kind of stumbled onto that was nascent and never really took off, which is you take the Facebook social graph. So if Steve and I are Facebook friends, I have private access to all of his likes and his visits and the things he's a fan of and stuff like that. And it turns out that a CTO or a tech guy from Etsy wrote a very prominent blog post around 2011 saying that if you broke down the likes on Facebook, it turns out that of the 5 or 7 million things you could like, 95% of them were limited to like 500 things, which tended to be cultural icons or sports teams or things like this. And so Etsy introduced this gift finder where I could go onto my Etsy, sign up through my Facebook Connect, and be pulled up, here are some suggested gifts for Steve. And if Steve likes Star Wars, I'd see a bunch of little knickknacks from Star Wars and t-shirts and things like that. And it was a really kind of neat thing. Fred Wilson wrote a blog post about how interesting this thing was. Walmart made some investments in a lab and wanted to start pursuing this. Facebook made a number of social commerce acquisitions. The problem with it was it all depended on a few things. One is how much will Facebook give you access to that? And, I could actually see all my 400 Facebook friends, shops for them based on putting their social graph information together with part two, which is what's the source that you're getting at to find gifts. And there were a few things you could do. You could do a massive search of everything, which is junky and doesn't work. You could just use someone like Etsy, who has a big enough resource of random knickknacks, but it isn't like formal t-shirts. And the third, which we started to use, was the Google shopping engine. Problem with that, is where we're going to pause on this and move forward, because this is where, despite everything we hear about net neutrality, the non-openness of networks, I believe, has been a kind of tragic barrier to social shopping. One, Facebook decided to stop letting you make access of that kind of data, and in fact, that kind of API access has been restricted, even though we all use Facebook Connect and the data is really important. They've pushed everything towards advertising. Two, if you've ever heard of API calls, the problem is I wouldn't be able to, in my service, ping the Google shopping engine enough times to yield enough results and enough great results when I was trying to see what gifts I might want to find for Steve. You'd be able to do limited numbers of that. And this is the issue with lots of people trying to build services around social ecosystems like Twitter or Instagram or LinkedIn or even Google searches. So I think, the issue with, and really what's happened with social curation, and if you want to guide me through questions about me, we can do that to make sure I covered that base well. But it's moved in the direction of what we mostly think of as Pinterest. There became a point about 3 years ago where suddenly more commerce was being generated through Pinterest than anything else. Now, that's wonderful, and it is a really important thing, but it's not personal. It's more that social networks have allowed us all to be able to plug into other people's expertise. And you're the expert on some of that, because this is more curation than what I would call social shopping, right? Because, and even big shopping guys have wanted to have a piece of that. And now even Instagram is a really great example of that. But it's very different than intimate knowledge of me in a social way being used to find things that I would really want, or what's important, because there were ventures like Gift, GYFT, and others that let you do kind of group buying. Why not pool our resources? Gene and Steve has 7 Facebook friends in common, and we just realized Steve's birthday is in a month. Would you like to, all go in together on this, thing that he wants? So
the thing I found interesting looking at the slide deck from Generous, and by the way, thank you for sharing. There's always something impressive and hard about when founders share the things that didn't work as opposed to only the things that did. But when I looked at those slides, my immediate reaction was like, why didn't it work then, and why is there still nothing that seemed, given how much information I put into the network, it seems like some of the things that you conceived, someone should have got, Facebook at least should have gotten right.
I completely agree, and I don't know whether attention just veered away from things. Again, the reason my venture failed was, the reason a lot of ventures fail, which is we just mostly executed poorly. The software wasn't as snappy and elegant as it needed to be. We didn't get out there and position it the right way. And honestly, I didn't stay the course. When we were doing Want, there were these things all over the place. The word want was everywhere at a certain level. And there were things like Want.it and other kind of curation apps. We talked about Fancy last week. And I kind of dismissed some of them, but some of them that stuck around, are real big standard bearers these days. So some of it's execution, some of it that stuff was impractical. We could not get a critical mass of stuff aligned, but it's a matter of focus. I don't have a good reason for why it's not happening as much now, as much as to say I believe the powers that be care more about advertising, right? They want to push what drives commerce to be more advertising driven, and in a way we haven't even mentioned in the midst of all this, Amazon, they've not, for Amazon, social shopping, which I believe is a valid thing but isn't what we're talking about, is your ability to have insane access to lots of personal reviews and being able to use those and understand who's bought what and build your list. But it's a little bit of a different thing. All
right, so let's talk about the players that are operating today and which ones, if any, are doing interesting stuff. So obviously the most interesting one in terms of not being Facebook is Pinterest. And I have a Pinterest story which I could tell, but let's just start with first of all, are you a fan?
It's funny. It's one of these ventures, one of these services that I will forget about occasionally, and then I will use in a flurry. And I'll use it for business purposes. If any of you have used any of these, tagging and curation and linking and bookmarking services, Pinterest is a great visual way to do that. So I sometimes will do private boards on business subjects that I'm looking into. I'm not a fan because it has become. I don't think they've guided it in a direction that has enough shape to it. The conceptual part is wonderful, and organically, it's been amazing. It's turned out to have gone in a direction that's very useful, and I think it's probably pretty lucrative for them. Although I don't hear much about them as a venture, which is it's skewed towards a older. Tending to be married female demographic, and it's skewed towards things like sharing recipes and craft-like things, and they've done a good job of trying to mitigate that. But I always find that Pinterest is a great example of how discovery, this stuff really well, how discovery and curation is less about invention and more about discovery and moving things along. You would think that Pinterest is this place where you discover and post a new thing. Well, they've always been a proponent, not even of the 80-20, but the 95-5 rule, which is that 95% of what gets posted on there is just being brought over from someone else who had posted it. And that's the only thing.
So here's what's interesting. You said something that I totally agree with, which is I feel like about every 6 months I discover Pinterest again.
Yeah.
So I'll give you an example. I like mid-century modern furniture.
Yep.
And so I put together a pin board of mid-century modern couches and end tables and bedroom furniture. And every now and then I wander into it and it's like, oh my God, that stuff is so gorgeous. And I love this and I love that. But the buying part is a little bit kind of imprecise. Some of them are just images and they're beautiful. Some of them are images that link to private stores and dealers. And I'm like, oh, I didn't know about them. And some of them have buy buttons.
Yeah, and I would say that there's some very specific reasons for some of the problems, although I don't know about the solutions. One is that, again, advertising or traditional advertisers and retailers kind of took over their business model, which is to say that commerce that happens because you bounce from them over to any number of retailers or brands that retail products, or occasionally the Amazons of the world. And so if you ever remember, there was a term that was hot in like 2011, 2012 called skim links, which is that if it hits you, you can run your own little sort of curation thing, and you might make half a penny for every $100 if it actually gets sold someday over on an Amazon. But that's really kind of affiliate marketing, which is really almost like advertising or shared kind of stuff rather than social stuff. The second piece that I think is really important there is that they decided not to build a transaction engine and make it store themselves. They chickened out, or they decided that was better. And I know we talked about Fancy last week. And what's interesting about Fancy is it's a small and stalled, probably venture that decided to build the capability for you to directly buy some of those things. But that is a hornet's nest of dealing with established franchise players that has been really impossible to make a go of it. And I think that, again, this is just, we're not freed up as much as we could and should be. And your instinct is almost, I might as well buy it on Amazon. I'll discover it here and go see if I can find it on Amazon. And so that kind of craters the business model of some of these guys. So, Pinterest, by the way, I'm a big guy for image searches. I find it to be an elegant way to sort of trick the system and find more precise and rich things. I also like to think visually. If you do image searches on Google, or even if you use Bing, Pinterest rules. You almost have to strip out. You have to do that little dash Pinterest to make sure that you don't get, Pinterest responses. So
two bits of news about Pinterest. One, they've just added a new feature called Shop the Look.
Yep.
Which says, hey, if you like this style, you can photograph it. They'll do an image search and a match, and then they'll give you all of the related images. So I haven't played with it, so I don't know that it works, but Ben's a smart guy, and so I'm going to say it works.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is, the rumor mill says they're now kind of aiming toward an IPO.
It makes sense to me, and we have not seen or heard in the general talk and traffic of business what's going on with their business and financial model. And, it's taken a long time, so I have a feeling they put it into sufficiently decent enough shape, maybe gave up on the super unicorn version, because after 8 or 10 years, you do, because of your investors, have to bust a move in some direction. This is part of our discussion the last week or two with certain companies that maybe finally had to do something, or they were going to lose the chance to do anything. But that being said, we need a lot of data to be collected again and tell us what the exact status and standing of Pinterest is, because it wouldn't surprise me if curation-specific apps or the likes of Instagram or even Snapchat haven't stolen a little bit of their thunder.
So in the spirit of full disclosure, I have to tell a very brief Pinterest story. A million gazillion years ago, my friend Brian Cohen, who is now the chairman of New York Angels, called me and said, there's this young guy, you've got to meet him. He's super smart and he really wants to meet you. And I scheduled half an hour and he came over to the office, and it was Ben Silverman, and he said, I have this idea for a website, and he laid it out for me, and he said, you're the curation guy, and it's going to be all about curation, and he wanted me to be an angel investor in what was then Pinterest. And Brian had just written the first check, and I would have been the second.
Wow.
And I did give it pretty serious consideration, but I did not write the check, and it is the one that got away.
It's a regret. That's the one that...
But I remember it. I remember his passion and his focus even back then, and I'm not even remotely surprised that he's as successful as he is.
Yeah, and they had moved. If you know their history is that they had moved through a couple different iterations initially before they landed on something really specific, and it wasn't so shopping specific, except it was very, whoa, of course this is going to be great by definition. And so it's a little bit of a corollary to all this, which is that in addition to social not being fully enough understood or leveraged in commerce, I think the value of visuals and the value of consumer visuals has not been. If I was going to say one thing that I would say has driven what I would call pure social commerce as something new in the last 3 or 4 years, it would be unboxings that go onto YouTube and other places. Yeah. I mean, those are, vivid and authentic and powerful, and they do a really good job. And I consider that to be a little more social than, I love curation, but pure curation is a little bit more of a critical science to me than, or even a critical art than be something deeply social.
So let's get to Facebook, because they are the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
So you think they've really dropped the ball on social shopping?
Well, look, there was a period where they were going to drive transactions inside of Facebook, and they were aggressively starting to do some things and let that happen. You could still see little snippets of that in different places. And let's not forget, back in 2009, 2010, 2011, you also had ventures being enabled to fully set up shop inside of Facebook. Build your whole world. It was almost like an AOL model from the old days. And of course, the most prominent would be somebody like Zynga, who had a whole business based on existing fully inside of Facebook. Both of those things are in conflict with an advertising model, because you're competing or eating your own in a way that becomes problematic. And I think they saw there was better distance and better use of our data. Let's not forget how obsessive and righteous Zuckerberg's always been about the value of the data. But I think the problem has been that they've snuffed things a little bit. And we were both lamenting about how little sort of innovative progress has happened in the places like Amazon and YouTube, Amazon and eBay over the last few years. And in a way, e-commerce has exploded because it couldn't help but explode, but it's been pretty linear in how it gets done. So Facebook, it seems like Facebook and Amazon can almost, as two giant players, can almost coexist without really being in each other's, shit very much.
So Facebook's trying this Facebook Marketplace thing. Have you tried it?
I have not tried it, and I've heard about it. I mean, and I've seen it, and I've read some of the stuff about it. And I actually think that's, I think probably what's waking them up a little bit is this whole idea of marketplaces being a huge new wrinkle in commerce. Now, sure, on the one hand, it tends to be for services and humans doing things for other people. But look, marketplaces, as is happening here, and they're trying to do, is a big deal too. And you and I can't remember whether you talked about this or not. I live in a town called Chappaqua. There's a part on Facebook called Chappaqua Moms. It's just another little shared group. It has about 6,000 people on it, and it is a trading post. And so, Facebook has definitely gotten wind of the power of that. And there are localized ventures like Nextdoor that are starting to get a little bit of heat around localized shared kind of commerce, right? Some of this stuff is the ball that was dropped, by some of the people that originally took over for the classifieds world, right? What's happened to classifieds? What's happened to, some of those guys?
I have to tell you, I've used Craigslist very, very effectively for a really long time. And in the last 6 to 8 months, the number of interest, when I post something at a good price that I'm just ready to be done with, a piece of electronics, the responses have dropped dramatically.
It's they had some serious controversies. They didn't have controls, and they had some things that involved more servicey stuff and sex problems and crime and misrepresentation. Maybe it just derailed them completely. It's very hard to run something. It's like Wikipedia, which at least has a more pure and noble, if it's not, and it's a little like Meetup too, right? These things that are not overtly commercial in their MO and their vision and their dream have a problem creating commercial viability, whether it's in transactions happening for them or them being valued the right ways.
So we just have a few minutes left. I want to loop back around to Want and Generous. So you sort of poked a little bit at net neutrality or the closed internet versus the open internet. There's a little bit of a, kind of canary in a coal mine story here, which is if a startup like Want today, if somebody wrote you a check and said, hey Gene, here's $5 million, let's do Want. Could you do it today?
Yes. I think there's ways
no VC ever.
Yeah, and by the way, I consider I answer that question not conceding that some of it is being done because the time finally did come and things have moved along. It's really interesting because and I know Dennis and Evan Cohen, who was the COO for a long time of Foursquare. Yep. And Foursquare is a little wrinkle in this too, Foursquare and Yelp, because, again, distance from the transactions itself. I think social shopping in a pure and personal and tribes kind of way is a really big deal, and closed networks can work really well, which is always an issue too. So, I'm actually surprised a little bit that Snapchat hasn't gone a little bit in this direction, but it could be done again today. And again, there's a big distinction between what Want was going to be and where I was pushing it with Generous and this social shopping and social gifting, which is really kind of, some of these things are anchored more in gifts than shopping.
So just sidebar note, I was looking for something today and I ended up on Google searching, and then I ended up on Yelp for a little bit. And I was shocked. Maybe I'm just the last person to notice this, but almost every single listing on the first page of Google, no matter how I structured the search, came up as a paid ad.
Yeah. Oh my God.
And on Yelp, the thing that says ad is so tiny, you have to actually wait, I want the organic results. And it used to be there was one ad at the top of the page or two, and then the organic results. And now it's literally getting pushed below the fold.
Steve, in addition to we're in holiday season, so we veered off the model a little bit, but in addition to loving it, hating it, we could have a betrayal feature once a week, because I really believe in the interest of driving ad dollars and metrics that drive ad dollars, there's a lot of, Google's original tagline, "Don't be evil." There's no such thing as a pure Google search anymore. When you list 4 words to search, it becomes inclusive of all those 4 words. I do those searches so that I can find things that only have those 4 words in them, and I don't need to go spend time putting quotes or asterisks around those words to make sure that's what I meant. And it's the same kind of thing with a lot of these guys. They're not providing enough of a service to you. Every time I open up Facebook, I immediately go to my settings and change it to most recent, because they do not give you.
Yeah.
They give you who they think you want to see or they want you to see in your newsfeed, not just your organic list of who's posted most recently.
All right. Well, we are out of time. So VCs, if you're listening, Gene's ready to take that $5 million check and rebuild Want or Generous from the bottom up. Gene, have a wonderful holiday week, and see you again next week.